Kathy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
I'm so glad to talk to you today, Chris. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. Can you give myself and the audience a little bit of background about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I work for AARP. AARP is a confusing organization even from the inside. So I like to explain that AARP is in three parts. There's the for-profit AARP Services Incorporated. Those are all the folks that are working on the daily to try to get really great discounts and membership resources for the 37, 38 million people who call themselves AARP members. We also have a foundation that works on sort of the charitable angle of the work that we do to support older adults. And then there's the sort of the social mission stuff that's sort of in between. We call it the enterprise. But within that, that's where all of our education and outreach work happens, our advocacy work, things like that. And I run a program called the AARP Fraud Watch Network. And we're all about helping older adults, really everybody, understand the significant risk their finances face because of the threat of fraud that has just grown exponentially over the last 5 years. And we do a lot in the space of supporting people who've experienced fraud.
That's great. Was there something in particular that got you into this field? Did someone tap you on the shoulder and said, "Hey, I think you'd be great doing this"?
It sounds like it was meant to be. If I look back at my career in a certain lens, it wasn't as exact as this, but my early career, I was doing government affairs, public policy around issues of the move from traditional pension plans to the sort of do-it-yourself 401k and what that meant to future retirement security. And I went from like the public policy angle to actually doing financial education for large employers for their employees for many years to help them understand the benefits of the 401k and all that kind of stuff. Had my own business for a decade, communication consulting, but a lot of it was around this, the employer benefits, the 401k and stuff. So my career has moved from educating current workers about how to save and invest and be prepared for a financially secure retirement. And now I'm talking to those workers who are now retired and saying, all that great stuff you did to have all these assets to have you be able to live through retirement are at risk. And we've got to talk about how to protect yourself and what we need to be doing as a society to really address this paradigm shift.
Gotcha. So when did AARP start their fraud prevention programs?
It's actually been around for a long time, but not in its current form. We have offices all around the country, and probably 4 or 5 offices had come together, and they were across the country, not even like geographically close, but they all had this idea that, we're seeing a lot of this happening out there. We're talking like mid-2000s. Mm-hmm. We should do something about it. So they created their own Fraud Watch Network programs. They had staff devoted to it. They trained volunteers. AARP has probably like 40,000 volunteers around the country. And the ones that sign up as volunteer fraud fighters go out into community. They were doing great work, and at some point sort of caught the attention of AARP's national office, and they created a nationwide program. I'm going to say that might have been around 2013. And then in 2019, we sort of revamped it, moved it from one part of the organization to the other, brought a lot more resources toward it. So the new Fraud Watch Network has been around since 2019.
Do you find that it is the communications coming from that department and the team are more accepted by older Americans? Whereas I know when you have, let's say, you people in their 20s something going into a senior community and, hey, we're going to do a presentation on fraud, they're like, you kids, I don't want to listen to you.
Yeah, well, I actually see a nice sort of comfort level with that intergenerational conversation. But the reality is most of our volunteers that go out into community are older because they're retired and now they're in a place where they want to give back. Mm-hmm. But we also do a lot, and some at specific states where there is a concerted effort to bring the generations together so that they can learn from each other in a variety of things, this being one of them.
Yeah, definitely technology is one of those things that has always seemed to younger generations are more on the cutting edge of technology. Older generations are a little less comfortable with that new technology.
Yeah, and I would say it's less about the generation's comfort level and more around the technology industry focusing on the
Yeah.
younger adult as who are more adaptive, right? When new technology comes out, they're missing a really big part of the market when they're only appealing to people
Yeah.
that are their own age, 20s and 30s, instead of people like me and my mom, 50s and over, who I'm great with technology that I know. But when the new stuff comes out, it's not because I don't understand it because I'm older. It's because it's not geared to me. It's
Yeah.
geared to a 20 year.
And sometimes it's just a matter of familiarity. For the longest time, I was an iPhone person. My wife was an Android person because that's what her company gave her. And anytime that she needed tech support on her phone, I'm like, well, I can't help you because I don't know anything about this platform.
Perfect
And,
analogy. Yeah.
and so it was just easier to, hey, if you switch to iPhone, then I can help you.
Did she?
Yes, she did actually.
Okay. Nothing against Android.
No,
Just
no,
better to be on the
it,
same platform to help each
it,
other.
it's very much a preference issue and what you're used to, and it's hard to when you're in someone's ecosystem. It's sometimes hard to switch to a different ecosystem. So does AARP see that? I think the kind of the conventional wisdom is probably not the right phrase, but the conventional perspective is that older people are more targeted by scammers and fraudsters and criminals. Do you guys see that as the case, or is it just that's kind of the narrative we like to use?
I am so glad you asked that, Chris. So we really don't know how much fraud is out there because you have to report it for anybody to know, and it's severely underreported because of victim blaming and shame and all this stuff. But even at what we know, the Federal Trade Commission has been looking at this data for many, many years, and they have always seen that more younger adults, when they report a fraud or scam to the Federal Trade Commission, they lose money more often
Hmm.
than older adults report. So it's always been there. It's just when that older adult is the target, there's so much more potential loss. Yeah, and it makes sense, right? If you're 23, 24 years old, just out of college, or in your the beginning of your career, you don't have a lot of assets. They're
Yeah.
tied up in other things, or you're at the bottom of your earning ladder. When you're 80 and you've been retired and you're not going back into the workforce, and all that money gets stolen by these criminals who are increasingly sophisticated, what is that person to do?
Yeah. And also, I think if a 20-year-old has their bank account gets taken over and $1,000 gets taken out, all of the money that was in their account. Okay, that's fine. I can recover that $1,000 over the course of the next month or months. But if you're in retirement and someone takes over an account with $100,000 and takes all of that, this person's been retired. They're not going to, aside from victim services or the criminal justice system, that money's not. They're not going to be able to re-earn that money.
That's exactly the point. And even for the 20-year-old who loses the $1,000, and I should say not loses, it was stolen from them.
Yeah,
That's terrible. It shouldn't happen. But like you said, there's a time horizon where they can make up for that. And that's just not the case when you're on the other end of the age spectrum.
yeah. So what are every time I talk to somebody who's providing support services, the discussion of reporting always comes up. And whenever we talk about it's $10 billion a year, $40 billion a year, it's everyone says it's significantly underreported. What are some of the biggest barriers to people reporting fraud and theft in this community?
I believe the biggest barrier is something that is actually beginning to break down, and it's the shame, the victim blaming. I think that we're almost at a turning point, and we can see it in our own research, where 3 or 4 years ago, even if I were to say, Chris, do you think you would ever fall for a scam? And you'd be like, not me.
Yeah,
It's not. And when somebody would fall for a scam, you're probably automatically going to, okay, well, what was it about that person that made them gullible or vulnerable?
Yeah.
Do they not know tech? Were they older, and so maybe there's cognitive decline? And that has been a very active part of the sort of the narrative, right? And we've deprioritized fraud as a result. Because if you can just say it only happens to older people who have cognitive decline and it would never happen to me, we don't have to worry about
Yeah.
it. But we're beginning to see that change. And just last week, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, we launched new research where we asked people about their concern about fraud. And so we're not hearing, oh, that only happens to somebody
Yeah.
else. 91% of US adults worry about fraud now. And their number one concern, becoming a victim themselves.
Yeah.
So that begins to allow for that change that we need to see.
Yeah, and I think there is a perception difference about it when you hear someone being targeted on on the basis of like a financial crime. We often do think, well, what did they do wrong? What did the person do wrong? You don't think that we don't say that when the person walks down the street and gets mugged or they get carjacked. You don't. Well, gee, if they just walked down the other side of the street, they would have been fine. We don't talk about it that way.
And maybe sometimes we do a little bit well, like did they lock the doors? But it's a small part of the larger discussion. That person is still seen as a crime victim.
Yeah.
Police show up, possibly investigate, and they find the bad guys who go to prison. That is not really happening in financial crimes.
Are you starting to see that increase as far as the police getting involved and actually doing investigations, or is it? I think kind of the impression for a lot of people have is the police, sorry, that's a financial crime. We can't do anything to help you. Have a nice day, and that's it. Is that really what's happening on the ground, or does it really vary from place to place?
It certainly varies, but that is sort of the theme, unfortunately, and it's no fault of the police officer who answers that phone when a victim calls. It's not a priority. They're made to believe, or they believe for whatever reason, that property crimes and violent crimes, those are the things they can do something about. When it comes to financial crimes, it's like, well, you gave them your money. There are a lot of financial crimes investigators around this country that are detectives or are working in private business who really get it, and they will go after it and try to help the victim. But by and large, right now we don't have that. But what I still try to tell people is report the crime.
Yeah.
For two reasons. One is the more we're reporting, the more societally we understand that this is a problem that we have to address as a whole of society problem. And the other thing is, what happens if 2 or 3 years down the road, your state legislature or even the federal government, although we know they don't do a lot these days, might create some sort of a restitution fund for financial crimes victims? And what better way to appeal for that support, but with a police report?
Yeah. Or someone else might have reported the same person, and as part of that investigation, they do recover money.
That's right.
It would be nice for you to get part of your money back also.
Exactly right.
Is there, I know that you're not in law enforcement here, so if you don't know, that's fine. When these are investigated, are we starting to see more of them, or a larger percentage of them result in arrests and convictions?
So I think what the big challenge to that is, there are investigations that happen. There are investigations that never start to begin with because the U.S. attorney doesn't want to deal with it or doesn't understand the impact they could have if they did prosecute. A lot of this is driven by crime rings that are outside of the country, and so there's a presumption that you can't get the bad guys anyway. But when someone just pulls a thread that begins to sort of unravel some things, you do get to see that there are tons of aiders and abettors in the United States working as money mules, money launderers, guys who pick up the money and send it to the next place or go into the bank and cash the fake check and get some dollars out of it. It's going after those. But the problem is these scams that are happening are, in terms of law enforcement, and I'm thinking specifically federal law enforcement, they're low dollar.
Yeah.
Even if it's a $10,000 scam, and that was everything you had, it's not low dollar to you, but unfortunately it is because of resource constrained federal law enforcement. But if there was a way to connect that $10,000 loss that was related to someone pretending to be your grandkid and connected it to the 8,000 here and the 9,000 there and the 12,000, like all around the country, and all of a sudden you have an investigatable case
Yeah.
because you've hit a threshold. And maybe with the FBI, it's $1 million. Take enough of those $10,000 cases, put them together, be able to tie them back to the same MO, and be able to actually hand that off to the FBI to go out and arrest
Yeah.
people. You begin to disrupt the fraud business model.
And I think that's, in my mind, that seems to be a parallel to how we've handled drug crimes. Is that if you go after the middleman, it just makes it hard for it makes it harder for the people outside of the country to perpetrate the crimes if the middlemen aren't available to do it.
And that the point is that get them off the streets and give them real time. There was a case that they actually did it this way in San Diego County a bunch of years ago, and they ended up taking down the U.S. end of a grandparent scam ring where people had millions of dollars stolen from them. And so they get arrested, they go for prosecution, and the judge gets it because the lawyer for the perp is like, oh yeah, he was just moving money from point A to point B, and she's like, you are a vile human, and gave him 9 years.
Yeah.
Not just a slap on the wrist and back out tomorrow.
And hope they don't get out for good behavior because they didn't commit any financial crimes while they were away from the internet.
We hear financial crimes that happen within the walls of prisons. So
yeah, I'm sure anywhere the technology can eventually get, it'll happen. So, what are some of the things that we can do around reducing the blame and shame aspect of it?
I have a website that I would love folks to go and visit. It's aarp.org/say this. And it's directed to a consumer audience. We're thinking mostly of those adults who have older loved ones that they provide some form of caregiving to help them understand that if a fraud like this happens to their aging mom or dad, to understand at its base that it's not something they did wrong.
Yeah.
And even short of that, we need to be talking about the scams that are out there regularly. We have a national dialogue. More people know what the scams are and can see them coming. There was research done by the FINRA Investor Education Foundation back in 2019 with the Better Business Bureau, I think. And they were able to determine that if you know about a specific scam, like the grandparent scam, you're 80% less likely to engage with it.
Wow.
So when we're talking with our moms and dads, aunts and uncles, even brothers and sisters, hey, I read about this scam the other day, or someone just told me that they got an Evite from their neighbor and it turned out that it had software in it that drained their bank account. What do you think about that? Have the conversation because it really is protective.
Yeah.
And then it's about choosing the language. And this site helps with that. We also have a professional version, and it's aarp.org/words matter for financial institutions, for helplines, things like that. Law enforcement, adult protective services, understand the victim experience. Like, my mom didn't intend to wake up and send $10,000 to a criminal.
Yeah.
She intended to help her grandson when she thought it was her sole ability to help him. So think about the context. Don't use the words that say, like you were duped, say somebody stole money. And we are starting to see a change.
So what are some of the other language elements that we should be avoiding? And some of it I don't think is intentional from people, but it's how we've talked about these things in the past. But if we don't talk about them now in the way that we're using them that hurt people, we can't change that. So what are some of the other phrases that we use that are not appropriate and that are disincentivize people to report?
Yeah, I think it's the focus on something that the victim did. The victim fell for it. She was scammed out of $1,000. duped, swindled, tricked, those kind of things don't even bring into the discussion that there was a crime committed,
Hmm.
that there was a criminal perpetrator. So we try to sort of just rework the sentence, a criminal stole this woman's life savings.
Yeah.
And there are a bunch of examples on our site that I referred to before that sort of help to get to that. We even see it in media coverage. And
Yeah.
fortunately, we are seeing a lot more media coverage of the scams that are happening, and that's helping to educate people and know what to look for. But we run into the, Vermont woman duped, $50,000. Older lady scammed. She's so embarrassed. Instead of like this criminal intentionally targeted this person, and that person now has nothing.
Yeah. You don't say the bank teller was duped into turning over $10,000 out of her cash drawer when the armed robber came in.
And you know what? Anytime there's an armed robbery of a bank, it's investigated 100% of the time.
Yeah.
And the money is typically found and returned. And if it's not, it's insured. Not quite the same when it's an individual.
Oh, that is really challenging. I mean, and I kind of see the perspective. I see the perspective of the news, and unfortunately, news has gotten very much about eyeballs and clicks, and we want to say things that are sensational to attract attention, but that doesn't really help the people involved to do it that way.
And I think the same reporter that used to write, Vermont woman duped of life savings would see the value in focusing on the criminal. I mean, I don't know if sensational is the right word, but it gets attention.
Yeah.
There's this bad guy out there who's preying on everybody they can get their hands on, and they're wiping them out, and there's no recourse.
Yeah. Criminal steals money from 110th victim this week.
Yes. See, we got to get you into the reporting business.
I'm trying, and this is definitely, for me, having run the podcast for 4 years, having to change the language that I use because of more and more people like you and other guests have said, hey, that's not a good way to look at this. That's not a good phrasing to use. And, I think none of us are in a position where we can't learn to help victims better and communicate with them in a more effective way.
And I think what your bottom line is, Chris, is there are things each of us can do. There are steps we can take. I have a mentor in this field who refers to it as hardening the target.
Yeah.
Like when you go to bed at night, you lock your doors and windows, right? You lock your car when you walk away from it. These are those kind of things. It's just a matter of getting out the word to enough people that they understand that there are things they can do. And that's a real challenge for educators. And some of those things are, like passwords. We're really bad at passwords, and we really shouldn't be blaming ourselves. Yeah. It's a system we inherited, but it's inherently flawed because you need a strong and unique password for every single online account. How many online accounts do you think you have, Chris?
I'm guessing I probably have at least 200.
And you have to have a strong and unique password for 200, even if it's just like your son's baseball team's listserv that you have in it, all the way up to your financial accounts, because if either one of them is similar or the same, and one gets broken, the other's broken as well. And there are ways to monetize even non-financial accounts. So we try to talk to people about how to use, how to create strong and unique passwords, the importance of it, but also, if you're comfortable in the space of using a password manager, consider that. If you're not, and you have, like I do, an iPhone where I can put notes in my phone for my usernames and passwords, but then I encrypt that note.
Yeah.
And my phone itself is encrypted, so nobody can just pick it up and open it. That's a way. Multi-factor authentication is so important. It's not foolproof, but if you have that extra layer of that one more piece of information that authenticates that it's you trying to access your account, that helps with a lot.
Yeah. Do you find, obviously I talk to cybersecurity people and who will have their views on SMS. Oh my gosh, it's utterly useless. It's a horrible form of two-factor authentication. I disagree with that in a sense. Do you find older adults have a harder time with the different elements that you can use for a two-factor authentication, whether it's an SMS, whether it's a physical key, a physical thing that they have to look at, or oh gosh, I can't even think the word, an app that stores the tokens.
Yeah. And I don't know that we actually have research on that per se, but we do have a lot of research on technology use by older adults, and it's a lot more pervasive in a good way than you would think, of people that can use technology and use it well and understand how to interact with it. So I don't really think it's an issue there. But true, like if you get a text message with that code and someone is socially engineering you to believe that they're the bank and they're sending you that code to prove it to you, it's bad, but it's something.
Yeah. And I just recently had a friend tell me that story, that he got a call from what he thought was his bank saying, hey, someone has access to your account and you need to make a change to your account. And I just need to verify that you are the person claiming to be the bank. I need you to verify that you are the customer. I'm going to send you a one-time code. And if you read that back to me, then I can confirm that you're the customer. And and he did it. And then he was like, "Oh no, this is probably not my bank." So he immediately hangs up, calls the bank, got to change everything and all that. Luckily, no one got into the account. But it got me looking at my own SMS two-factor authentication messages, and maybe only a quarter of them say, "We will never ask you for this over the phone if as part of the token." It's usually just here's your 6-digit code,
and it expires in 30 minutes.
And it expires in 30 minutes, rather than saying, "We will never ask you for this code. If someone is asking you for the code, hang up the phone."
It is so important to have that piece of information associated with the number, with the MFA. And not even because, if I'm thinking that someone is actively taking money out of my account, I may not even read that. I may just use the number. But if I'm not in that situation and I see that regularly, which I do with more of my accounts than not now, it's a really great reminder for me, so that if someone were ever to ask me, I would be like, well, wait a minute, that's out of the norm. I'm told not to.
Yeah.
So I think there's a really important preventive educational element to that, as well as right in that moment.
A little bit of standardization that needs to happen at the financial institutions.
Yeah.
Are you finding that the financial institutions are now being more responsive when fraud and scams happen?
Well, and I think that there's a lot going on here. I specifically talking with financial institutions that I work with. For example, I'm on a Federal Reserve working group with financial institutions on scam information sharing. Really tough nut to crack. But there's a lot of focus, a lot more understanding that this person is a victim of a crime, and they deserve our empathy and our support, and whatever we can do within our abilities to try to claw back funds if they haven't been received yet or haven't left the account yet. I see a lot more focus on that. But at the same time, I think a lot of people would look at financial institutions and say, look, that person's account just got wiped out through social engineering. No fault of theirs, understandably not a fault of yours either, perhaps. But that's everything that person had. You should just cover it. But that brings up so many more issues of moral hazard and people knowing to game the system. And there's got to be something that we as a society can do to address these losses. You mentioned at the top, like maybe 10 billion a year.
Yeah.
I would point you to a Federal Trade Commission study from October of 2023 when they were talking about how underreported fraud is. In it, they talk of an extrapolation they did. And this was on 2022 data. So then it was like 9 billion. based on underreporting, their extrapolation gets us to $137 billion
Ooh.
in losses in 2022.
So it's about 1 out of 6 gets reported then?
Yeah, the way they looked at it is if you had under $1,000 stolen, you're probably about 2% of that is reported.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's over 1,000, maybe it's 6 or 7%. So yeah, right in that window. 137 billion.
I totally understand that the under 1,000 people wouldn't report it. It's the phrase I would use for myself, and I'm not saying that other people should necessarily think of it the same way, as I would think of it as, man, that was a tough lesson learned. For myself, for me, this is not claim. If you have only $1,000 in your bank account, that's not a tough lesson learned. That's a horrific, a horrific circumstance in your life to face. But I think there is that perception of smaller amounts are definitely going to get reported less frequently than the larger amounts.
Yeah, but you make a really good point because $1,000 means very different things depending on where you sit.
Yeah, it's relative.
Yeah.
If I'm in Africa making $1 a day, $10 is a massive amount of money. If I'm independently wealthy, $1,000 is I dropped it on the floor. It's not worth picking it up. So people's circumstances significantly impact what they're going to do.
Yeah.
So of what people should do. So we talked about people using password managers. What are some other things people should do to protect themselves? Kind of the equivalent of locking locking your car door when you walk away from it, locking your front door, closing your windows at night, these sort of things.
Unfortunately, where we are in society right now is we cannot trust incoming communications.
Yeah.
That phone call that doesn't come from a list like your daughter or your son or your doctor, you have to let it go to voicemail, or if you have an answering machine. So let the technology on that side help weed some of this stuff out, because phone is still a huge fraud vector.
Yeah.
But so is email, and increasingly so is text. So when you get an email and it's from Amazon and you have an Amazon account and it says, hey, we just want to make sure that you made this purchase of 7 iPhones for $12,000. If you didn't, you can ignore. But if you did, click this link.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like it's from Amazon, and you're like, oh no, that wasn't mine. But if you click that link, you're going to the criminal. We have to try to learn that in an email or a text, and it's coming from a retailer we do business with, a bank we do business with, just don't engage with it. If you have an Amazon account, and 97% of us probably do, instead of clicking that link or calling that number that they're providing, you have the app, log into the app. You're on the website, log into the website. And if there's a problem, you'll see it immediately. So we just cannot trust the links. Social media is a huge risk vector right now for a variety of frauds. Someone hacks somebody's Facebook account, and all of a sudden they're pretending to be that person and telling all of that person's friend group that they had just collected $12,000 in a federal grant, and you can too. Just click on this link. All of that kind of stuff is happening, very regularly. So we have to be cautious. And if we're on social media, we have to make sure that that our accounts are kind of locked down, right?
Yeah.
They come to us completely open. I think they should come to us completely locked down, and then we can opt in or opt out. No, I don't want just my family to read what I'm putting on here. Open it up and let everybody read it. But that needs to be a consumer's decision.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen that concept work with savings for retirement. If people are opted in when they start their job to save for retirement, 90% of people don't opt out of 401k contributions. But if the company doesn't automatically turn it on, it's like only 20% of people go in and say, yeah, I want retirement. I want to add to my retirement contribution.
It's funny you brought that up, because I worked on that project to try to get Congress to say it's okay, employers, to do the opting in back in 2005 or 2006 at the Brookings Institution. So that's very close to my heart and my history.
And we are starting to see some banking services starting to say two-factor authentication when you set up your account is the default. It's not, hey, let's add some extra security. It's
Right.
you have to go out of your way to reduce your security. And we're going to give you lots of red screens that say, hey, you're increasing your risk by doing this, as opposed to, hey, customer, we've got this big, nasty, long process to do that will increase your security. And then they, downplay it and talk about how horrible it is because banks don't want people who want to sell you stuff don't want increased friction. They want decreased friction.
I think it would be really, it would behoove all of us, no matter where we sit in this world, to recognize that fraud or that friction is not a four-letter word.
Yeah.
Friction is good sometimes, and if we can explain to a consumer why we're doing X, Y, or Z to protect your account, there's going to be a lot more acceptance of that friction.
I love that phrase. Hopefully no one has trademarked it. Friction is not a four-letter word. And it's funny because if you look at so much in our life, companies are spending millions and billions of dollars to figure out how to reduce friction, and the criminals and with the scams are trying to do the same thing. So if we add friction back to our life, we reduce the chance of being taken advantage of. See, now I got to think of my wording here. With reduce the chance that someone is going to steal from us or target us. So once someone has been targeted for a scam and they've lost money, what should they do? Who should they contact?
Well, if it had anything to do with your bank account, financial institution, contact them as soon as you realize what happened, because there may be an opportunity for them to stop a transaction or to at least stop some of the transaction. If you were coerced into believing there was a huge financial emergency and the best way to solve for it was to buy gift cards and share the information on the back of that card, as soon as you realize that happened, flip that card over and call the number on the back. There may be, criminals are really good at this gift card payment stuff. It's not as big as crypto right now in terms of a payment form, but there was a time at least where I was being told that the money wasn't being drained right away from those cards because they were just doing it so much they didn't have time. So the chances that you might get some of your money back by freezing the card, by talking to the company that issued that card, it could help you.
Yeah. And obviously report it to local law enforcement.
Yeah, I think the most important bottom line here is reporting it to law enforcement. We talked about the underreporting problem, a lot of valid reasons for it, but not good reasons.
Yeah.
And if we can disabuse this notion that it's our fault and we did something wrong and we're being stupid and we don't want anybody to know, and instead get angry and say, look, somebody made me believe something that wasn't true, and now they've stolen XYZ. I want a police report. Will the police actually, execute an investigation? Not sure. Probably not at this stage, but that information may help them with other cases that they have. And it's certainly going to help you, not hurt you, if somewhere down the road there is a means of restitution. You have a report to prove what happened.
And I think it parallels our health, is that you have to be your own advocate.
Yes.
You don't just assume that the police are going to follow up on it. Don't just assume that the bank is going to do their part. Hey, this is what happened. What are you going to do, and when are you going to do it by?
Yeah, and you'll find, I think people do want to help. It's just, that sort of growing understanding that it isn't the fault of the victim is really helping the sort of frontline responders to maybe approach their response to it differently, even if they're not able to recover funds. Maybe there are other ways that they can react to that person so that person feels validated that something bad happened and it wasn't their fault, goes a
Yeah.
long way.
Does AARP provide victim services?
Yeah, we have a great program. My colleague Amy Nofziger has run our Fraud Watch Network helpline since way before there was an official national Fraud Watch Network. I told you about the states, several states back in the early days. It's gone through a lot of change. Now she went from maybe a dozen trained volunteer fraud specialists taking calls to now over 200 around the
Wow.
country. And it's not a hotline, it's not like 24/7, but 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday, you call this number, and I'll share it in a second. And if you're just reporting a scam because you don't want somebody else to experience it, but you didn't have a loss, we stop at level 1, we say thank you, and we record that and send it to the Federal Trade Commission. If you're not sure about something, if you've experienced fraud yourself or a loved one has or is in the throes of it, go to that next level and it's these 200 fraud specialists, and you actually get to talk to a human being.
Oh, that's good.
And last year, I think the incoming calls were around 97,000.
Oh,
Yeah. And then we have a program that we stood up about 3 years ago, which is growing now. I'm so heartened to know that people are starting to learn about it. These online small group Zoom support sessions. So we have a trained facilitator and maybe 5 or 6 people who are willing to talk about what happened to them. Just get on the phone together, on a Zoom call together. And it's about supporting each other, understanding that it's not your fault, you're not alone, and really beginning to start looking at the emotional, the negative emotional impact that so much of this causes. And I think we thought it would be like a starting point for people, and then they would move on and do whatever. We have repeat attendees all the time because it's so helpful for them just to keep hearing, yes, no, it's not my fault. I'm sorry that happened to you, and to be able to take that in and give it.
yeah. What's the number for that?
So the helpline is 877-908-3360. And then the online program you can learn more about and sign up at aarp.org/fraud support.
Awesome. We'll make sure to include those in the show notes. As we start to wrap up here, what are you seeing as the kind of the next big context around scams? I mean,
Cyber. I think the biggest concern for me right now is fraud related to cryptocurrency. We're seeing 2 aspects of that. One, where it's being used as a method of payment when someone tries to make you believe there's an emergency and you got to convert money at the ATM, the Bitcoin ATM machine down the street, and send it off to solve whatever problem it is. Your bank's in trouble. The more concerning one is cryptocurrency investment schemes that start out with something as simple as what seems to be a text message sent to you in error. We're seeing so much of that, and that message comes to you, and my example is always like, oh, Dr. Smith, Fluffy's really sick and I bring her in right now. And who doesn't want to help Fluffy?
yeah.
Who doesn't want to help Fluffy's owner? So you respond and say, I'm sorry about Fluffy. I'm not Dr. Smith. I hope everything works out. And that begins the opening to a discussion, to a conversation that goes on to eventually building a trust relationship. And this is weeks and months. And then that person, your new best friend on text is, hey, I've shown you how high I'm living. And it's because I invest in crypto and I can teach you how to do it.
Yeah.
And it is just wiping people out. And again, someone might be hearing that going, well, how could anybody not see through that? Well, you don't, because the criminal has a playbook.
Yeah.
And the playbook it plays out. If the person engages with a seemingly errant text, that's all it takes. So it's not the victim's fault. I want to say that too.
Yeah. Yeah, I was surprised that there was a piece of time, maybe a couple of months ago, that I was getting 1 or 2 of those sort of text messages a day to any one of the variety of numbers that I have for different things. That it would be, hey, this is Michelle. I'm running late for my appointment. Can you let Bob know that I'm running late? there's a sense of urgency there. It's, trying to catch us on a sense of morality and doing the right thing and being a good person to help out. And then the first one I got, I think I sent a response. I was like, okay, this is odd. Let me send a response. And the person sent back a photo of themselves. Well, not them, but they sent back a photo. And I'm like, okay, no one I know would ever send a photo claiming to be of them to someone they don't know. I'm like, okay, this is a scam. This is the lead for the scam. The beautiful young lady accidentally texted me and now wants a relationship. I don't. But it was okay. Here we go. We're going down this road.
That sounds to me like a scammer who hasn't gone through 101.
Yeah. But I've seen those things even on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
You have such an interesting background of work experience. Maybe we could be friends. I'm like, that doesn't sound like a normal professional introduction on LinkedIn to me.
And sometimes it's just accepting a LinkedIn request because that person is showing up in the LinkedIn world of people that you have relationships with or have respect for. And so you're like, oh, well, if he's in that guy's LinkedIn network, then he can be in mine. And it seems so innocuous, but that's all it takes for that LinkedIn person then to reach out to you and have conversations about the things you really care about because they're monitoring your LinkedIn to begin a relationship that goes the same route.
Yeah. Oh, it's a scary world that we live in that people have decided rather than working hard, they're going to try to steal money from people.
Well, I mean, that's been since the beginning of civilization, sadly. But it's also, there's a message of empowerment here, though, too. And it's being aware. It's sharing what you know. It's understanding that these are crimes and the victims are victims and they deserve justice. They deserve empathy and respect. And if it happens to you, get mad about it and want to do something. If it happens to someone you love, don't get mad at them. It's not their fault. Get mad at the person, the people behind these schemes and seek to do something. Bring justice somehow in whatever small or big way. But we all have to be doing so much more in this space.
I love that as a great summary of our discussion here is to get angry and do something.
It's time. It's time, folks.
Don't do anything illegal, but do something.
Yes, and don't stay on the line with a scammer because you know it's a scammer and you think that you're just wasting their time. That is something people love to do, but the longer you're engaging with that scammer, the hotter your number is, or the hotter your text address is, whatever. They buy and sell these things, and if you engage for a minute or more, you're getting so many more scam attempts. So disengage.
I love it. I love it. Are there any additional resources that you want to make sure we mention as we wrap up here?
Well, I mentioned that the program I run is the Fraud Watch Network, and we have a website for that, aarp.org/Fraud Watch Network. There's lots of great articles on what's happening out there. We have a fraud resource center, tip sheets on the latest types of scams. We have a scam tracking map. You can report a scam you've seen in the wild on there. We have a great podcast as well. Chris, I don't know if you're familiar. It's The Perfect Scam by AARP. And we really take the focus of victim impact versus the cunning criminals who are getting away with all this stuff. It's really the focus on, okay, this is the after.
I love it. We'll make sure that we link to all those resources. And I know Adam, I think it's Adam does the pod. Adam and I don't remember
currently it's Bob Sullivan.
Okay.
Yeah, Bob Sullivan is The Perfect Scam right now.
You've got some great hosts on that podcast. I appreciate what they do.
Thank you.
We'll make sure to link everything in the show notes. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.